As I went out to get my drink of water right before I came up here, I leaned over to Tony T back there and I said, "I'm fixing to use you." And he kind of laughed, and then as I'm drinking my water, he comes running around the door. Is it a good way or a bad way? I said, "It's something you posted." Tony posted a couple of pics just recently, remembering the 70s. And I thought, wow, that is such impeccable timing, because I was already working on this idea. I was already working on the idea that God parents. God allows things to happen. God does things directly in our relationship with Him to the Father, to His glory. And I was going to kind of key off of what Tony had posted. It says, "Back then we made ramps, built forts, drank out of garden hoses, rode our bikes everywhere, didn't wear helmets, never even heard of a knee pad." The other picture he posted, it was skateboards and big wheels and bicycles and kids being kids. 70s kids, my generation. Really one of those last generations that walked and biked to school unsupervised. For blocks, our parents never worried about us. The neighbor would pick you up in his sight when you went past his house, and the neighbor would pick you up in his sight when you went past his house. And Mom and Dad didn't follow along in our shadow. We stayed outside all day long. My mom would lock the door. You can come in for lunch. You can come in when it gets dark. And they didn't check up on you. They knew that you knew where you were allowed to be. They knew that if something happened, someone in that phone tree of a community would call and let them know. And so we did. We played in a neighborhood and we went to parks, and we did it from daylight to dark. We drank from water hoses and creeks and ponds. I have taken drinks out of cow ponds that would make your stomach turn to see them. I have pushed the scum out of the way to get a drink because you weren't going back in the house. And by the way, kids, there was no such thing as bottled water. We didn't even know what it was. We played in creeks that had snakes in them. We got dirty. We ate mud pies. We rode big wheels and bikes without helmets, without knee pads, no bubble wrap. And we would ramp over anything. You built a ramp and you ran at it with your big wheel or your bicycle as hard as you could go, and you crashed into whatever was on the other side. We made fun of each other at recess and we worked it out. We played on playground equipment made of metal, and it was assembled with uncapped bolts that went through the hole and had a nut on the end of it, and then a jagged end that was just there. All right, there were no plastic caps over it. We raced to the slide, but you raced to the slide at recess always with the intention of being second. And you younger kids have no idea, but it's because the first guy had to donate a layer of skin to a metal slide that was the temperature of the surface of the sun. By the way, the top of the ladder for that slide was 14 feet off the ground with almost no handrail. And we would pull each other off the top of it. We would wrestle to get to the top of it. Our swings had 20 feet worth of chain, and you launched out of it as far as you could. We would hang upside down on a jungle gym and try to pull each other off over asphalt that was the temperature of the surface of the sun. And if there was no bone showing, you rubbed monkey blood on it and you went back to playing. The real name for that is mercurochrome, but monkey blood. It was red. If you messed up, you went to the principal. And guess what? You got busted. You got 3 licks. And they didn't call Mama and ask permission to bust you. They didn't make her sign a note at the beginning of the year giving them permission to wear you out. And Mom and Dad did not run to the school and threaten to sue. They didn't defend you. They didn't claim that you were just a little hyper or that's just the way he is. What they did was they busted you when you got home. I have sat in the corner of classrooms day after day after day because I couldn't quit talking. And I got in trouble for talking to myself. You said yes, ma'am, and you said no, ma'am, and you respected everybody in authority. But we were indestructible. I heard a comedian say we were the last generation whose parents smoked with the windows rolled up while they rolled down the road at 70 miles an hour and you wore no seatbelt. You climbed over the seats, you looked out the back of the station wagon, you slept in the floor, and we survived. And we're still here. We're not going anywhere. We were thick-skinned. We never cried bully. Growing up, part of growing up was learning to make fun of each other and get past it. And by the way, recess was one of the best social environments a kid ever had. It's part of the problem with our world today because you went to the playground, you had your problems, and you worked them out. And you went back in the building as friends. I said all of that to say this. We got in trouble, we made mistakes, we learned and we grew, and here it is. Our parents let us, and it was to their glory, loosely. Because you would go to town and somebody would run into your parents and say, I saw your child the other day and he's a good kid. He's respectful. He opened the door for me. Or they would say, hey, your kid got caught picking watermelons out of my patch and I dealt with him. And mom and dad would say thank you either way that the conversation went. And here's the part of that glory thing. When we learned as kids that the problem was actually really too big for us, we knew where to go. We knew who was dad. We knew who was mom. We knew how to go find the answer. When we were disobedient, they disciplined us. When we were hurt and needed comfort, they comforted us. And we went to them. And it was to their glory because it reminded us over and over and over as kids who was the parent and who was the child. And that relationship was to our parents' glory. You got noisy in church, you got your lips popped. You got a little older, you got pinched right there on the back of the arm. Or my grandmother would take a hairbrush out of her purse and smack me on the leg. You got taken out and you got brought back in, and it was to their glory. Because you were well behaved and you did not disrupt worship. I tried to do the same thing with my kids. I tried to let my kids make mistakes. And at times they had to pay the price for making those mistakes. And it hurts as a parent to watch. When your kids hurt, when they make mistakes that cost them, it hurts you. And we're about to transfer this to God. Understand where we're going. But I would step in when necessary. Parents step in when it's a life or death thing or it's a life-altering decision. We rescue, we resolve, we teach, and that is God's style all the way through the book. And remember, He's the perfect Father. That was His style nationally with Israel. We're going to look at that. And it was His style individually with His children throughout the book. The text is Hebrews chapter 12. Verse 1, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Where's that come from? That comes from chapter 11, right? These heroes of faith. His children. Were they perfect? Hardly. Have you ever looked at Hebrews chapter 11 and realized how hard God had to work to parent those examples in Hebrews 11 to get them where they were supposed to be when chapter 12 opened? Abraham was a liar. Abraham's faith was not what it should be. He couldn't follow God where he wanted to be. And when things got too slow for Abraham. He came up with his own plan, and he had an illegitimate child. Jacob was a liar. Moses was a felon. Rahab was a prostitute. Samson, there's not enough paper in the world to discuss Samson's issues. And David, the man after God's own heart, was an adulterer and a murderer. So were they perfect? No. But what else do we see? God gave them free will to His glory. Because every one of those in Hebrews chapter 11 grew through those things. They made their mistakes. They got hurt. They broke God's heart. And when the right time came, He stepped in, and they grew to be a man after God's own heart. They grew to be the Samson that brings down the Philistine temple. They grow to be the Moses that is this hero of faith. Notice also the idea of parenting in in Hebrews chapter 12. He's going to get to discipline. That's a parenting thing. God is talking in Hebrews 12 that we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses that I parented in my style until they became the examples that you can follow. Now then, I'm going to do the same thing with you. Do not think lightly of the discipline that you're going through. There are going to be times that I respond to your free will choices to my glory by disciplining you, and you're not going to like it. It's not any fun at the moment. It was never any fun when my dad got that look and said, "This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you." And you scratch your head, but you know what's coming. That's not any fun. But it molds you. It makes you into what you're supposed to be. Go back, and I want you to think about this all the way from the beginning. We're in Genesis in our minds. God created that list of witnesses in Hebrews chapter 11. He then chose them for specific missions. He chose Abraham to be the father of a nation. He chose Moses to be the leader of a nation. He chose Samson to be the judge. He chose David to be the king. And He developed them. God created mankind to His glory. And He did it, this is key, knowing we would fail. And He already had a plan in place. Revelation refers to Jesus as the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world. The Lamb was already slain because God knew He was going to create a being in His image that would fail. And to His glory, He would rescue that being. But He still created us with free will. In Genesis chapter 1, God made man in His image. God has free will. Chapter 2, it repeats itself. Chapter 3, we see them fall. God still chose that path. We are not bots. We have a choice. Hear this statement. Free will brings more glory to God than any other part of creation. And it took me a long time to realize that. Because we look at an evil world, we look at mistakes that get made. Free will brings more glory to the Father than any other part of creation. Here's what I mean. Nature has no choice. The heavens declare the handiwork of God. They don't have a choice. They don't have free will. The birds sing. They don't have a choice. It's the way God made them. But when we choose to obey, when we choose to revere and bow before Him, because we have a choice, When we choose to worship Him, it brings Him greater glory than even the heavens declaring His handiwork. The earth declaring His glory. Even more so than the cattle on 1,000 hills. Why? Because we could have chosen not to. So He parents us in a style where we can choose, and then by teaching us, teaching Abraham, teaching Moses, teaching David, and Samson, and Jephthah, and all those other guys in Hebrews 11, Rahab, when He teaches us and develops us to the point that we free will choose to worship Him, it is all to His glory. Let's look at some more history. I want to help you understand some things. God created Satan. Everything except God was created. All right? God created Satan. He created an angel. He was an angel of light. That's why he can still disguise himself as an angel of light. He chose to fall. When he fell, when Satan challenges God in heaven in Isaiah, God could have eradicated him. Satan could have ceased to exist at that moment. God could have stripped him of all power. God could have banished him where he did not have access to our world. He did none of those things. So Satan is able to infiltrate the garden. God let him. Why? Why give Satan a chance at us? Knowing we have free will, knowing we're going to fall, knowing the Lamb has already been slain from the foundation of the world, God let him. God could have put a wall around the garden that Satan could not get through. God could have silenced him. You don't have a tongue. You don't have any way to tempt Eve. Again, he could have eradicated him. Look, I didn't eradicate you when you fell from heaven, but now you're trying to touch my creation. I'll just eliminate you. He didn't. He let him infiltrate the garden. Why? To his glory. Why did he let him tempt man? To his glory. Because free will is to his glory. It lets him be remember what we talked about? Our parents let us make mistakes. They let us get hurt. As long as it wasn't life-threatening, we made those choices, and then they would come rescue us at the right time. God lets us, because of Satan's influence, make those bad decisions. And it breaks his heart, but he's there to rescue us at the perfect time. Free will is to the glory of the Father. He will ultimately lock Satan away at the end of time. No more access to us. That defeat will be to his glory. It's all to the glory of God. The unnumbered saints in Revelation are to his glory. He allows the persecution of the first century and unnumbered saints under the altar and in heaven who die for their faith are to his glory because they died for their faith. Stephen was to his glory. Could he have stopped it? Absolutely. Absolutely, he could have stopped what was happening to Stephen. To James, to the rest of the apostles, to the rest of the first century church. But it was to his glory. Next step, Adam and Eve fell. He could have started over. He could have done away with Adam and Eve he could have done away with Adam and Eve and said, that experiment did not work. I'm done with these people. And we see in Scripture phrases like, it grieved God that he made man. What does that mean? Is he repenting? That's what some people say. Well, God made. No, it means it breaks his heart. It means he's brokenhearted because the ones he made in his image have moved away from him. So he didn't eradicate Adam and Eve. So what happens? Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, through Eve, through Adam, through mankind, death through sin, that's the consequence of sin. So death spread to all men. Why? Because all sinned. God allowed it to happen, and the repercussions are still being felt in our world. Why? Because free will is to His glory. The ones that come back to Him are to His glory. Job, Satan is prowling, and notice how this conversation starts. Satan, where you been? I know where you've been, but I want you to tell me. Oh, this is what I've been doing. Have you considered my servant Job? God puts him out there. Why? God could have said, nope, not having this conversation with you, Satan. You've been prowling, you didn't find what you want. You're banished. He let him have access to Job. Why? Flip over to the book of Job with me. I want to show you something. Job chapter 1. Verse 8. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth. Blameless, upright, fearing God, turning away from evil. Why does God give access to Job? Because God's a little bit gloaty at this point, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. God is proud of Job's free will choices, and He knows how this is going to end. He knows Job is living and resisting to His glory. And when you get down to verses 20 through 22, what happens? Job arose, tore his clothes, shaved his head, fell to the ground, and worshiped God. He has lost, from our perspective, everything. And it's to God's glory. It's good. I can handle it. I will not desert. Naked I came, naked I'm going back. Blessed is the name of the Lord. Through all of this, Job did not blame God. Chapter 2, verse 3, Satan, where you been? Oh, it didn't work out so well for you, did it? Job didn't deny me. Oh, yeah, but this and this, you let me touch him. God's gloaty. He holds him up. You can touch him and nothing's going to change. And nothing does. Now jump to the end. Chapter 42, verse 7. God says, this whole thing has been about me. It's been about my glory, Job. It's been about my glory, Satan. Because of free will. Israel, He kept letting them go. How many times should God have destroyed Israel? Well, it's just about every other page of the Old Testament. We've been working through that in our teenage and college classes. We finally get out of Egypt, and we get all the way to the Red Sea, and the whining starts. Go, cross the sea. And it says on the other side that for the first time, Israel trusts God, reveres Him, trusts Moses, and you turn the page and they're complaining again. We're hungry. Turn the page, they're complaining again. We're thirsty. Turn the page, we're complaining again. There's an army in front of us. Oh, God keeps letting them go to His glory, because when they do finally cry out in Judges, when they finally cry out in Samuel, He brings them back to His glory. Their leaders, Samson, David, Jonah. Think about it this way. The belly of that big fish, as disgusting as it is to God's glory. Because He is parenting Jonah back to where he needs to be. They're all to His glory, over and over and over. And they turn back, it's to His glory. Now get the other side of it. When they go too far and they are destroyed, like Israel is in AD 70, and the temple's level, Jerusalem is level, that's to His glory too. Because He says, look, I gave you free will. You chose not to allow my glory through repentance, you're going to glorify me in your destruction. Even the, quote, bad guys, Ahab and Jezebel, they're as evil as it gets, and yet they're to His glory because He gives them chances. He gives them chances to His glory, and when they finally have gone so far they're not coming back, He destroys them. That's to His glory. We often wonder why God allows a fallen world, why God allows violence against each other, etc., etc., etc. It is because it is to His glory. It is because it brings us back to Him. It's because it points out that we need Him, and that when the time is right, He will rescue us. Now I'm going to ask you a totally different question, and this is just for parents and grandparents. Do I parent to His glory? Am I rearing children that bring Him glory by their choices, by their use of free will? But now back to our subject. God parents to His glory. Everything that happens in our lives, whether God allowed it, God caused it, relates to Him being the Father and Him loving us and Him doing everything He can to get our attention, to save us, to rescue us when necessary. And yes, sometimes it hurts. I've told you this before, I'm a t-shirt reader, and when I go to shows I'm reading t-shirts, and a lot of times I'm making notes as to how many different band shirts I see. But I saw one the other day that fit this, and it cracked me up at the same time. Maybe a tad irreverent, but please get past that. It made the comment about it's no longer Jesus take the wheel. It's Jesus needs to pull over and beat some of you with His flip-flop. There is a point where God has to get our attention. There's a point where God has to discipline us as a nation, as parents, as children, as individuals, because it is to His glory. So why the world we live in? From day one, it's because it's to His glory. My job is to live within that. Are you living to His glory today? Or is He going to have to discipline you to get your attention? Is He going to have to rein you back in? Or are your free will choices already bringing Him glory? If you're not a child of God, please obey the gospel today. Please give Him the glory He deserves as Lord and Master of your life through baptism for the forgiveness of your sins. And if you're already a child of God, and we see Abraham in that relationship, and we see David in that relationship, and yet your life choices are not bringing Him glory, and He's going to have to rein you in, please let that happen today as well, as we stand and sing.